Good evening. Welcome to our Tuesday, February 16th, 2021 regular school board meeting. In the boardroom, myself, Elisa Vacalis, along with board member Hildy and board member Donley are in the room. And I have our superintendent, Dr. Gina Bishop. On Zoom, we have board member Holloman, board member Mitchell, board member Bellamy, and board member Marcette, as well as our student representative, Miss Emily. We have all board members in attendance. And at this time, I'd like to do the flag salute. And member Donley, if you would do that for us. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge with gratitude the Dena'ina people, both past and present, who have lived on these lands since long before Anchorage was here. May we all be good stewards of these lands. Chinan. And Emily, if you would please continue our opening statement.
My name is Emily Hickox, and I am the student representative to this board. I was elected to serve through the Student Advisory Board. My votes are advisory only, and I offer a student voice to the body. We want to welcome you to our meeting and thank you for attending and supporting the work of the Anchorage School District and this board. The board thanks students, parents, teachers, staff, school business partners, and the entire community for your investment in our district with your time, your talent, and your tax dollars.
Next up is the approval of the agenda. I will entertain a motion.
I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
I second. Member Bellamy.
Thank you. Are there any adjustments or modifications to the agenda by board members? Seeing no objections, the agenda passes as written unanimously. Thank you. Next up, community engagement, board, conference, and committee reports. First, we'll start with our board committees. Member Marcette, Chair of Finance.
Yes, we met on February 10th. Basically, it's to review our budget again. If there were any last minute changes, another opportunity for board members to ask questions. We talked a little bit about the ESSER 2 funding and how that is helping us with our $28 million deficit this year. And just more questions and making sure that the board had a good understanding of the budget. And our next meeting will be next month, and I believe it's a second Wednesday. Am I correct, Katie? Because we've changed that, so I don't have it down pat yet.
I believe March is the first Wednesday because of
spring break. Yeah, so first Wednesday in March. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Chair Bellamy for communications.
Yes, thank you. We have not met since our last meeting. I'm trying to think here. I don't think we've met since our last meeting, but our next meeting will be March 9th, I think. It will be on March 9th. The other part, I'm sorry.
I do believe you met last week and talked about legislative updates in Member Donley's resolution last Tuesday.
Oh, we did. Thank you. I'm a little discombobulated, but we did. We did meet last week, and here's the agenda right here. Sorry about that. So our last meeting was we actually did. We considered Mr. Donley's resolution. It did not move forward, but we had some good discussion. We also talked about our legislative buddy program, where we are all assigned legislative buddies, and we were going to make sure that we contact them. And then we we talked a little bit about the meetings we were going to have with AASB, their advocacy. That's the Alaska School Board Association, making sure that we were ready for our legislative meetings last week, which we held last week. And I think that pretty much covered that pretty much covered our work, our business. So our next meeting, thank you, Madam President. So our
Very
next
welcome.
meeting will be on the 9th of March at 4:30 p.m.
Thank you. Chair of Governance, Member Hildy.
Thank you. We met on February 9th as well, and we had one discussion of our conflict of interest policy and accepting campaign donations if we're going to then vote on a contract, and generally just went through that discussion. And Member Vacalis was going to check with the Council of Great City Schools just to see if there's other policies out there from other districts, but otherwise no further action at this time. And then we discussed the anti-racism and equity policy, discussed making it 2 policies, an anti-racism policy and an equity policy. And we'll be meeting, in fact, tomorrow just to focus on those 2 and really working to get, closer to a final product, and discussing also community engagement, what kind of community engagement the committee might want. So if board members have input on that, they're welcome to email that as well, or community members. And then our next meeting is right after or right before whatever Margot just said. Oh no, it's tomorrow. Yeah, our next meeting is tomorrow. I don't remember the March date, but there's also one in March 9th.
All right, thank you. Member Mitchell, you have your hand raised. Was this relative to a committee report?
No, it was relative to a conference report.
Outstanding. That's what is coming up next is board conferences, and we did have a couple recently. And so, Member Mitchell, if you want to talk about yours.
So I attended the half-day National School Board Association. They had a little mini conference on equity. And, the beauty of virtual is that it's possible to do so much more in this realm. And I don't know if anybody else had an opportunity to join in on that, but I was really impressed by a young Black man who talked about being in college and studying English, and he was in way over his head. He picked English because he thought it would be an easy major, and they were reading Chaucer and Shakespeare and, people he couldn't keep up. And he said he got really good at cheating. And one day a professor called him in and asked him if he had written the work that he had provided for. And he said, "Oh yes, that was one of my best papers. What did you think?" And instead of countering him, she started talking to him for about 45 minutes about his life, about his background, about his experiences. And then she asked him again, and she said, "You're not going to get in trouble." The bottom line is she spent the semester working with him outside of her office hours, outside of anything. And instead of, starting with 6th grade level books, she gave him books by African-American authors. And he said he never knew that Black people were scholars. He never knew that Black people had written books. And of course, these, the autobiography of Malcolm X, things that engaged him as a young Black man. And so he talked about equity in terms of meeting people where they are. And he went on to get a PhD in English and is very successful. And it was an incredibly powerful story to me. And I also want to tie that into a couple of people I met. I heard from this past week who one person has been in Alaska for a very long time, but is in Portland temporarily because her husband's trying to reach captain level with Alaska Airlines and needs to be down there. And she said, it makes me appreciate those Anchorage schools. It just doesn't compare down here. And then a couple of days ago, I talked with a man who had lived in Alaska for 20 years, went to Seattle for a couple of years, and is now back here with 2 kids in high school at Service and 2 kids in middle and elementary. And he said they missed the schools here so much. So I'm tying those 2 things together because I know that the experience of that Black man, I know there are many, many teachers within our district who understand how to make those connections and who go the extra step. And I'm so appreciative of that. And it was just really heartwarming to hear these 2 people talk about how wonderful our Anchorage schools are, because I think, it's easy to focus on things we could be doing better. And there are many, and we are focusing on that, and we're going to be making improvements. But we are doing a good job. And I guess the other thing is, anyway, I'm just really proud of this board for the guardrails that we've developed and our focus on equity and the anti-racist policy that's being developed. And I really appreciate that. So thank you for letting me share those thoughts.
Thank you. Member Hildy?
I had 2 trainings this past week. One was the parliamentary training that I emailed the board summary on, just reminding us not to be on the internet during our board meetings, not to be communicating either passively and reading communications directed to the board or replying to emails or texts. That all becomes part of the public record. But also our private channels, if we're talking about board business, that's also part of the public record. If there's something to say, let's make time in the meeting for it. So if somebody is struggling with that, we always want to help make that happen. And then the Council of Great City Schools governance coach training that's still going on each month. Margot and I were both selected to do the cohort training. But the cool thing that's very exciting is the council is working with some research institutions on data collections. So I'm going to be one of the people, but we're going to watch board meetings and chart and create a data pool, a massive data pool for some research institutions to use on goal monitoring and student outcomes so that they can use that for better quality research on school board governance. So very exciting. Beta testing starts this month and then we'll begin in 2019. So if other board members, you have to go through a training and make sure you have a reliability assessment to do. But more hands are good because we got a lot of hours to watch. Thanks.
Next up, Board Member Bellamy.
Turned it off. Thank you. So yes, Dina, that was a very good training. I really, really enjoyed the training and listening to that young man's story. Well, Dr. Thomas's story, I think his name was. Anyway, I started the cohort training, the Council of Greater City Schools officer cohort training. And I did that for 2 days. And it was amazing. One of the things that really stood out for me that I think all of us could probably benefit from is looking at our behavior, attaching a benefit to it, a cost to students to it, and then just being more aware of, how we make our decisions. And do they benefit us as board members, or do they benefit children? And I've decided I've got to work in that area to make sure that everything that I do has an outcome and a benefit for students. So I'm really enjoying that, and I want to thank you guys, the board, for supporting me in that. And then my last comment just had to do with thanking everybody for showing up with for the legislative meetings last week with our legislators. And I'm hoping you're calling your legislative buddies. So I look forward to hearing more about those as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Donnelly.
Thank you, Madam President. So having multiple high-risk factors for COVID, I've greatly appreciated the ability to attend by Zoom. And one of those high-risk factors related to my eligibility for Social Security and Medicaid allowed me to be eligible to get the shots. So I did get my second COVID shot about 10 days ago, and I might be pushing it because the CDC has been between 10 and 2 weeks before you're supposed to go out and be able to do things again, but I'm really happy to be here. We've got a wedding coming up in my family that's going to take some planning and effort on, so there may be some time in the next couple months I might have to travel. But other than that, I'm going to try to be here in person now that I am inoculated.
Thank you. Welcome. Glad to have you back. Board Member Marcette.
So community council meetings, I don't know why, but they're not asking me any questions. So either I'm doing a good job of telling them what's going on, but I haven't had really any questions for community councils. I did want to let everyone know that I'll be conducting a training. So you want to be a school board member, it's part 1 and part 2, roles and responsibilities. First one is February 22nd from 6 to 8, and we will cover superintendent and board roles and responsibilities, policy, Open Meetings Act, and then on March 1st from 6 to 8, we'll be going over what a board agendas look like, Robert's Rules of Order, just a quick overview, board ethics, budget, goals and guardrails very quickly, and just talk about what would your first school board meeting look like if you were a school board member. So I hope lots of people join us. It's on our website and it has the links to those classes.
Thank you. And just wanted to share that we had a good weekend 2 weekends ago, Super Bowl weekend, but it was the AASB legislative fly-in, and board member Hildy, myself, members Marcette and Bellamy all attended over 2 days, along with 3 students that were wonderful advocates for the student voice. It was, so many good things were said about their participation and what they had to share. And so it was a good weekend. There was a lot of learning. For me, one of the biggest sessions I appreciated was the superintendent evaluation one that was done by an attorney, very timely. And then, just a lot of the other good conversations. And so it was a good couple of days, which led us into good conversations, with our legislative groups. And so to echo the other previous comments, thank you to the board for participating in all those. That is awesome. Did any board members have any other community outreach? I know member Marcette kind of already touched on her community councils. Calling me crazy, but the one thing I keep seeing at community councils is there's a lot more participation these days. I've seen some councils that have, upwards of 60 people on a Zoom call that, if you're in person, it never would have been. So it's a very interesting thing to see. But certainly there are a lot of, conversations out there that are very relevant today. So to member Bellamy, thank you for putting out their update to the FCC, because I see that is getting out to a lot of the councils ahead of time. And so that is wonderful. So thank you for doing that. And if I didn't see any other hands up for the community outreach portion, we'll go ahead and move on in the agenda. We have goal monitoring, which is our 2020-2021 goal monitoring calendar. So we're looking at the tail end of this year for where we're going to go.
Thank you, Madam President. Our suggestions, I have a plan for the rest of the year, as well as bringing you additional data on grading that I shared last week that I could bring forward this week. It was still being compiled. So for the month of March, I would like to present data on iReady as well as Alex. And these are 2 assessments that we receive both reading and math on, and they're computerized assessments. They're the ones that we have been using prior to coming back into school within a school in school rather. In April, we'll really have time to do the assessments that are taking place now in the month of February, which is FastBridge. And FastBridge is a curriculum-based assessment. If you've heard of Dibbles or AimsWeb, it's what we've done in the past, where kids you use the curriculum, reading, a real skill, to tell whether they can read. So those are curriculum-based measures, as well as MAP. And students as they re-enter, are taking those this month. And then, of course, in May, we want to share, although we won't have the graduation rate, we want to share the information about students who are in our system who did graduate, those who are finishing summer school, and then finish up with those grades as well. So that is our plan for the rest of this year. But in continuing with just practicing, monitoring and outcomes, and practicing capturing the data and discussion around it, we have the ASD at-home secondary grades that are planned to be delivered tonight. These are the students that were not included in all of the grades that we shared and the marks that we shared with you last time. Those were just students in our traditional high schools, if you will. Alternative schools, charter schools, homeschools were not included in those data. So I'm delighted to share with you today. If you take a look, the ASD at home as compared to in school, and I want to be clear that the ASD at home are these 4. ASD in school, although not everybody's in school, it's still more like the traditional program. I know that our names that we selected at the beginning are a little confusing now, but they are Padea, ASD Virtual, Family Partnership, and Frontier Charter. And these are the count of students that are in grades 6 through 12, not the total count. I'm only going to share secondary students, grades 6 through 12, to match the 6 through 12 students that were in the in-school set. And this just gives a mind's eye of the percentage of the students who are participating in an at-home model and the different programs. This next shares the student count information. So these are students. Later, I will share the marks or the grades given. So the graph, or the chart rather, just shares the grade level and then the program and then the difference to the whole. So as ASD Virtual is within its first year, the original questions came about ASD Virtual and sharing where did they sit with everything else. There isn't a methodological sound longitudinal data set that we can share year after year after year because it was just a new program this year. But in order to gain context and perspective on the new program, what we've done is look at the enrollment demographics compared from the ASD at home and all ASD secondary, limited to secondary levels from 6 through 12, if they were in 6th grade in a secondary school. So we did not include the elementary. I wanted to just be clear that all schools are included, middle schools, high schools, charter schools, online, alternative, virtual, all of them. Even the 4 that I listed are in the larger data set, and then we're going to look at them as a subset of that larger data set. So ASD at home, as shared, has about 3,547 secondary students in grade 6 through 12 as compared to the whole set of all secondary students, which is 22,317. The at-home students choosing one of those 4 at-home programs within our district is almost 16% of all students that we had in secondary. And comparing the distribution among the grade levels, ASD at home has a higher rate of high school juniors and seniors, and you can see that from the chart. If you look at the sheer number as compared to the N of all. And none of the differences by grade level, though, were statistically significant. It's just sharing the larger percentage of 11th and 12th graders as compared to the rest. So by the numbers, we always like to ask ourselves, well, who are these kids? If that's the total number, what is the ethnicity distribution of our students who are participating in the ASD home? And remember, ASD all is every single student. So comparing the student distribution, all student groups except the white student group had a lower rate of representation in the ASD home than all ASD secondary. And the difference between the rate of white students in ASD secondary and ASD at home was almost 16%, which actually was higher at a statistically significant level. So specifically that the white students made up the larger percentage, you see that growth there. It was an increase of 15. And when we talk about statistical significance, what we're running is a regression analysis. And so you then say, this actually, there's something to this. So if that would be an area where we would want to look more to ask why. When we have differences that are not statistically significant, it falls in the array of the distribution. So this one is like, what's going on there, is what you would want to ask yourself. Comparing student distribution among groups of interest, like we do, we always look at economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, and English language learners. And all 3 groups of interest were less represented in ASD home as compared to the all SD secondary. The difference between the rate of economically disadvantaged students was, which is under about 15, almost 16%, it was lower at a statistically significant level. So that means it's more than just the random distribution. In summary, ASD at home has a larger percentage or proportion of white and non-economically disadvantaged students than ASD secondary as a whole at a significant level. ASD at home has higher proportions of junior and seniors in high school and a smaller proportion of English language learners and students with disabilities. When considering the lived realities of attending ASD home, almost purely virtual, and a digital experience, this distribution is not unexpected. Generally, affluent families can more easily afford the technology costs associated with distance learning, and older students are generally more motivated or self-directed and can handle the online learning more so than younger students. It's important to keep this overrepresentation, though, of white, older, non-EDS and non-ELL students in mind as we review the rest of the data in the set of the marks. Because, again, these students did have some significant differences. So the overall secondary grade mark distribution in our ASD at home. So these are just the at home. The total mark count is 16,857. The largest categories, very similar to the ASD in school, was A's, accounting for over 52%. And of the marks earned, the second was B's, and finally F's were at the bottom. One of the things that we don't have on this list was the rate of incompletes or not assigned, NA, and that was 5.93%, so 6%. And we did find that the majority of those were in 6 through 8. And if you recall from the ASD in school, that was due to the program around keeping kids involved, don't let them fail. We're going to teach them and make up the gaps. We are going to utilize really the machine thinking kind of curriculum and target what they missed, not have them redo a class. That we have systems now with Alex and others that can exactly pinpoint the skill that was missed, teach that, and allow students to move on. So it's going to be very deliberate rather than redoing everything. It's not about the work. It is about what learning did they miss? What don't they know? Because if we don't fill those gaps of what they don't know, we're going to have this year after year after year, because we know that prior learning builds on the next year. So here it is by grade level distribution, and the grade level counts the N, which we call the N is at the top, and you can see the number of students in each of those categories. And for all grades, the majority of letter marks were A's or B's, which is about 59%. Grades 11 had the largest rate of F's, followed by grade 9 at all around 20 and 21%. But grade 10 had the least amount of F's there. When examining the data by grade level, it's clear the vast majority of I's and NA's, again, are middle school students with 6 through 8. There was about 10 to 14% of students in the 6th. They made up the majority of the incomplete grades, rather. Grade 12 was somewhat unique in that the rate of C's and D's were higher than any other grade, but not at a significant level statistically. And none of the differences between grade levels were statistically significant. So they kind of looked like each other, if you will. They weren't statistically significant, wondering, why was that 10th grade F lower? And really it's due to the random distribution, and it would be what would be expected by the random distribution. And again, as we move into it, the ethnicity and the student groups really show us our kids and where our gaps are. For all student ethnicity groups, except for Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander, the majority of letter marks were A's or B's. For Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander student groups, the combined rate of A's and B's was less than 50%. And we saw these in the same as ASD in school. Certain student groups are going to show the same pattern at home as well as in school. The Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander student group also had the highest rate of F's, followed by Alaska Native American Indian. And if you recall last board meeting, if you look at the stacked graph of Alaska Native American Indian and Alaska Native Pacific Islander, the orange is greater. Those are higher, and that occurred as well with students in school. The white student group had the lowest rate of F's, and the data also evidenced in the highest within the school population for white. One interesting difference between student ethnicity groups to look closer at was the difference in IN marks between the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander group. It was actually, I don't have it on here, but it was actually almost 25%, and the white student group was 2.5%. That's significant. The Native Hawaiian Pacific and Islander group had 125 grade marks in the INA category, while the whites had 257. And given their total N, by percentage wise, that's why it was seen significant with almost 25%. Technically, more than twice the count of Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander student group, the Native Hawaiian Island Pacific Islander student group had a higher rate of IN marks, which was a statistically significant. It means really in that social force, whether interpersonal or systemic, it's influencing the rate of INA. So something is going on there. That's when it's statistically significant. When you put in your measures for regression, you're like, okay, it shouldn't just randomly happen that way by the current distribution. Something is going on, which leads us to really our folks in schools, our experts, in leadership positions as well as teachers to say what's going on in the system that has just a certain group of people being affected a certain way. That's when you look in the mirror instead of out the window kind of thing, how we talk. Another interesting difference is the very high rate of A's for the white student population at 61.5 almost. This was true for whites in school as well, but they were about 52% in ASD in school. So the white student group had the lowest rate of F's and incompletes, and the rate of A's was higher at a statistically significant level, indicating the grade mark distribution was significantly different than the other student groups. We should examine grading practices and policies for ASD at home concerning the approval of incomplete grades, of course, because we have so many, to see if they're somehow connected to a certain group or the student group, the white student group, before we widen our scope to other causal factors. So we really want to look at, what are we doing within our system where it's showing such statistically significant differences. And here's the interest groups, which is the last part of the data set that we take a look at. Again, the majority of the marks were A's and B's, and that's the green and blue stacked graph. You can easily look at stacked graphs and say, oh, that's more than 50% or 50%. So that's why some folks like these instead of the line graphs. But the economically disadvantaged from the A's to the F's, if you look at the green and the orange, there, none of these groups is actually standing out as statistically significant. We do have information on the rate of incompletes for English language learners, and it was higher than any other group, except for the specific Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander group. There might be overlap in these two groups, but we need to consider a closer look into that. So it's not on this chart, but ELL students had a large rate of I's. And this provides just time. If you have questions about these data, again, they provide us, and these are the types of data that we look at with, as we're going to share, just our equity audit. It has us look at ourselves systematically, is it socially, how we do business, that students who really should be able to, afforded the opportunity by us to achieve at different levels. So we have some inconsistencies.
Are there any board members with questions for Dr. Bishop? First one, Board Member Holloman.
Yes, I think it would be helpful in the future if we could have a breakout of race within economically disadvantaged, because I feel like a lot of times when we're looking at disparities, that's what we're really looking at. But we need to look at it both ways. We know this isn't tied directly to race. The economic disadvantage is a huge factor in it, and we just need to know the proportions in that group as well. So unless it's right in front of you, I wouldn't ask for it tonight. But in future presentations, that would be helpful.
Thank you. Through the president to member Holloman, we can do that. And I believe that a few years ago we did that. And actually we did demonstrate that it was race, not just certainly the largest part of students who are represented in different ethnicity categories do make up lower SES. But when you took out SES, there was still a difference in some of our categories. And we did that on MAP about 3 or 4 years ago, just for a certain subset, but it could have changed from now. So we'll take a look at that.
Next up, Board Member Bellamy.
Yes, I have a question about, I guess ASD Virtual is in its first year, and because we were trying to find a way to keep our kids with us as opposed to them going to some other correspondence type school. So, but this data, what you presented tonight, it's got all 5 of our options, or is it 4 options included?
Through the president to member Bellamy, they're all included. And you can see the half of the student choices is in ASD Virtual. But what really these data demonstrated is that they are parallel to ASD in school. So these similar outcomes came, the students that are in the larger set of ASD in school and the ASD at home have very paralleled data sets with who does well and who doesn't.
And so with ASD Virtual being new, have we looked at those grades? I mean, I'm just wondering why we didn't separate those grades out. Family Partnership, Frontier, and Paideia hasn't been around as long as those others, but I would think that their grades are going to probably be pretty, maybe not this year, but they've been around and they've been doing the at-home thing for a while. ASD Virtual is new, and I'm wondering if we could look at what that grade data looks like.
Through the president to member Bellamy, I guess I could do that. I presented that to you in the Board Connect, but I was wondering what the interest was. We capture data to ask questions, so I wonder what your question is that you want to have answered.
No, I'm just wondering how I saw I did not see. Well, if it's in, I read what's in Board Connect. I'm just curious whether the program is doing what we need it to do for all kids. And since we're looking at grades, I would just like to see that program, since it is new. I would just like to see how kids are doing, if it's doing what we want it to do. That's all. Simple.
Sure. Member Bellamy, through the president, the data for ASD Virtual was placed in the Board Connect, and we can certainly put that in this same presentation style if you'd like.
Okay. No, if it's in Board Connect, that's fine. I saw what was in there, but I don't remember seeing the ethnic breakdown of the grades. So
no,
I'll go back.
We could do it in this format. Just the grades were.
Oh, okay. No, my question has to do with the ethnic breakdown of the grades. Not just like it's just clumped into here with all the other ASD at home programs.
Would you like all of the programs broken down by ethnic?
That would be fine. But I have a sense of what's happening at Frontier and Family because of their history. ASD Virtual is pretty new, and I'm just curious as to whether it's, how is it attracting kids the way we want them to be attracted? Because it's new, and maybe we need to wait a little longer because it is new. Maybe we need to wait a little longer to look at, to make that assessment. But no, I'm just curious as to what are the ethnic breakdowns of the kids who are in, of everybody in that ASD program.
We can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Next up, Board Member Hildy.
I'm just looking at our student outcome folder here, and on the WHO for the multi-ethnic student, my understanding of why we do breakouts for, white, Black, Alaska Native, Pacific Islanders, because we're looking to see if there's a discriminatory component. I mean, that is my understanding of why we have these kind of breakouts. But when there's a multi-ethnic category, I don't get any information that matches. It's not useful. I don't know anything from that category. So I understand it's the federal guideline, but I know we've talked in the past the ASD does have some breakdown of it, and I don't know the answer on how to get it into a useful way, and maybe it can't be this year even, but still that category is not provide any information.
But through the president to member Hildy, I understand. So the 2 or more races, and perhaps Mike Fleckenstein in capturing data. This is all of these categories are defined initially by the federal government, and in selecting that, can you share a little bit about that 2 or more races? That's so, that is a self-selection.
Yeah, through the president to member Hildy, Dina's right on in that it is a federal category that we use to disaggregate on. It is 100% self-selecting, and so there's no you get to just pick whatever you want to. There's no no proof on any of those things. And so I get where you're at. We do not break that down further from that particular selection, but we do with all of the other categories that are available that folks self-select as well.
And I know that's not very much. We don't have much information either, but I would like to share with the board that I think that the breakdown of ethnicity and race and perhaps student groups would really be advantageous for all of these because if we go back to where I was, actually the first, keep going. For the schools. If you take a look, each of these, almost all the programs, Padea, Family Partnership, and Frontier, almost all doubled in school size. So I think there's going to be a significant difference. Member Bellamy in the data that was prior to this time as well as this. So we'll provide those for all of them because Family Partnership increased by about 750 students. The Padea School increased almost by 200, and Frontier Charter, I believe it was about 150. So very different student groups that they have, and interesting. There has been, in just anecdotally from schools, when this whole system moved everyone to online, different things. That there was a difference between a traditional homeschool family and understanding the service and then not. So they really had to work with their families to understand the services they have and then they don't. Same thing with ASD virtual and then ASD in school. It really is talking about what we can do and what we can't just because we all had to navigate. So that's a good point, and we'll break it down for all of those.
Thank you.
Thank you. Member Holloman.
To Superintendent Bishop, when you mentioned that the different programs went up by so much, are you saying these numbers aren't really accurate any longer? That there are a lot more in these various programs than what? Or I guess what I'm asking, this is the beginning of fall of 2020, and they've since added a lot of students.
Through the president to member Holloman, from last year, I think the point was being made that from a board member that I know all those other programs because they're just the way they were, but I do want to bring up that we had such an outflux of ASD in school to ASD out of school programs that from FY20 to FY21, these programs doubled and sometimes went over doubled. So their student counts increased significantly. Family Partnership had a charter for 750 and they served over 1,500 students this year. But these are just the secondary students. And that's true for all of these Padea as well as Frontier and Family Partnership. Significant increases just like ASD virtual into the out migration into some type of ASD at-home program.
Gotcha. I'd forgotten this was just secondary, and that's where the numbers weren't clicking for me. Thank you.
All right, last call for any other board member questions for Dr. Bishop. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on in our agenda. Next up, I believe, is our public testimony. I will read a kind of brief statement. The board welcomes public testimony. We value public comment as it ensures that we remain aware of public thoughts, ideas, and concerns, and it informs our decision-making process. There's a 1-hour time slot at the beginning of the meeting. Testimony in excess of 1 hour will be heard at the end of the meeting or may be submitted in writing. Each person will have 3 minutes to testify. When 30 seconds remain, a chime will ring to inform you so that you can finish your sentence. Additionally, it is not our practice that board members answer questions or engage in discussion with members of the public. This is your time to speak and our time to listen. The board will consider all information shared by the public, and when deemed necessary, issues raised in testimony will be referred to the administration for follow-up. So far, I have, I believe, 10 people signed up on the list. We're going to start with speaker number 1 on the telephone, Dave Carter. Dave, are you on the line with us tonight? And as a friendly reminder, it is *6 to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
We sure can. Thank you so much for joining us. You have 3 minutes and the floor is yours.
Good evening. I am Dave Carter, a retired attorney living in Anchorage. I am interested in education, in civics education, and keeping the public informed about how our legal system works. Because members of the public only have 3 minutes for these comments, one cannot begin to provide even a portion of the info which is relevant to you here. But my telephone number is 907-349-4980, and I encourage anyone to give me a call. I can refer you to relevant information which has been kept from you about the election and the impeachment trial. There was a lot of unnecessary confusion about who won our 2020 presidential election. Some of this confusion led to people storming our seat of government, our Capitol building in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. These rioters fought with Capitol building police officers. One officer died, many were injured. This should never have happened. It should never happen again. There was no confusion about our 2020 presidential election results. Fox News and other news organizations called Joe Biden the winner on November 7th. 81,283,495 Americans voted from across America for Joe Biden. This was 7 million more votes than Mr. Trump received. It was not close, and Mr. Biden received 306 electoral college votes when only 270 are required to win. Mr. Trump received the same 306 electoral votes in 2016 and called it a massive win. So with 7 million more votes and the same 306 electoral college votes, the 2020 election was indeed a massive win for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. The only presidential candidate trying to steal the election by lying to the American people was Mr. Trump, along with his supporters in the big lie. They lost some 60 court cases, including at our Supreme Court. The good news for all of us is that the liars lost and facts, evidence, and science and our legal system won in 2020. Good government won. Remember those regular press briefings at the White House by a press secretary to keep Americans informed? Science is back too. Dr. Fauci explained that President Biden told him and others to let science control decisions. Things will be much better if we want them to be. We are back to being the United States rather than the divided states. But we have to honor truth, transparency, facts, evidence, and respect our legal system. A good education helps, and we need our elected officials to restore honesty in government. Please call me if you have any questions. Dave Carter, 349-4980. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, speaker number 2 on the telephone, Daniel Kemp. Daniel, are you with us on the line tonight?
Yes, can you hear me?
We sure can. You have 3 minutes and the floor is yours.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Danielle Kemp. I'm a retired Army combat officer, teacher in the ASD, and parent of 2 ASD students. I'm also the co-chair of the AEA's Human and Civil Rights Committee and president of the newly formed Alaska Coalition of BIPOC Educators. So I usually call in and try to convince the school board to do something or another, but tonight I want to speak directly to the people listening to this broadcast instead. Anchorage is a town where almost half its residents are non-white. This large and broad BIPOC voting constituency that is not being served by the conservative members of this school board. How, might you ask, did I come to such a startling conclusion? Well, it's because of several of their actions, inactions, and unanswered questions like, why are they so willing to put our BIPOC communities in COVID danger by sending our kids and teachers back to school without all the CDC recommended protections, knowing it will hurt our communities the most? And when they do, why have they gone out of their way to not provide equitable educational access to quarantining students who just want a Zoom class with their teachers and classmates? Why aren't the First Peoples and the Dena'ina recognized and acknowledged each morning at the start of each school day like they should be? Why have they not yet condemned white supremacy and white privilege as the root causes of the insurrection on January 6th? Why were they trying to sabotage the new anti-racism policy and stall the federally mandated external equity audit? What have they done to shrink the BIPOC teacher gap, where less than 1% of all teachers are indigenous in a city with about 23% Native Alaskan population? That's a 22% gap. Representation matters. Why haven't they modernized and corrected a biased curriculum, which sanitizes and whitewashes the horrors of colonization and wrongly favors education from the viewpoint of the colonizer instead of the colonized? History looks and sounds a lot different if your people have been under the boot or knee or whip of the oppressor. Look, you and I both know that the conservative board members are not equipped to meet the needs of our community's most marginalized populations, which also happen to be almost half the whole city of Anchorage. There is a lack of empathy and desire for understanding from these members that should frankly disqualify them from office they hold. They may disagree and look at, but they may disagree, but look at what they do and not what they say. We need school board members who will look out for all of the ASD and not make excuses just to look after the white or wealthy. If they're not willing or able to do that, then they do not deserve your vote this coming April. Thank you for your time and have a good night.
Next up, speaker number 3, Dr. Paula Williams.
Good evening. I am Dr. Paula Williams, co-chair for Alaska Black Caucus Education Committee, and I testify to the recruitment and retention for teachers of color. Black students comprise about 15% of all K through 12th grade students, although they increasingly attend schools with at least 75% non-white enrollment, as do Hispanic and American Indian students, 58, 60 to 30% respectively, according to the National Center for Education Statistics. A report by the Learning Policy Institute reveals that when teachers of color are with students of color, that the academic performance improves, graduation rates are improved, and that Black students of color are more likely to attend college. The Center for American Progress also insights into these effects, noting Black teachers are less likely than non-Black teachers to perceive Black students' behavior as disruptive, and all students, regardless of race, report feeling cared for and academically challenged to excel by teachers of color, according to the Learning Policy Institute report. Alaska Black Caucus value the relationship we have formed with Alaska School District, and along with Alaska School District, we want to ensure equity regarding education provided to Black and Brown youth. Taking this into account, what hiring policies and procedures has Alaska School District put in place in order to hire more teachers of color? And how will Anchorage School District ensure the hiring process is a fair and just process for teachers of color? Thank you for this time.
Next up, speaker number 4, Shelley Krajicek. Shelley, are you on the line tonight?
Hello.
Hi, thank you for joining us. You have 3 minutes and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Shelley Krajacek from the National Education Association, invited here today to visit with you on behalf of some of the educators in Alaska, in Anchorage. And I will tell you, I almost feel like what I needed to say has been said for me. I came to speak with you today about the anti-racist policy that you have been considering for a while now. And I have heard tremendous commentary, both from the superintendent and from Board Member Mitchell, about some of the learnings that you have engaged in. You see, this isn't about saying you're doing things wrong. It's about doing what Maya Angelou said. When you know better, you do better. It's about the youth in the story from Board Member Mitchell. You know that there are incredible educators, phenomenal teachers reaching those students every day throughout Anchorage. But we need to make sure that those are not isolated incidences. We need to make sure that their reach is systemic and that all of the students of the Anchorage School District are getting access to the high quality education instead of just some few, like the example. I know that you can lead by example and that you can show what a diverse and truly representative of this nation's school district you are by leading with passing this anti-racist policy and taking tremendous steps forward. I am very excited to be able to celebrate the passage of this policy. I look forward to hearing about the successful vote. Thank you for leading by example. Thank you for honoring the struggles of the students of color of the Anchorage School District. And thank you for studying the data that says that they need more and that you can do more. I look forward to seeing that success. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, speaker number 5, Don Bockelman. Don, are you on the line with us tonight? And Don, if you can hear us, it'll be *6 to unmute. All right, we will move on to speaker number 6 on the telephone, Takeda Parker. Takeda, are you on the line with us tonight? Takeda, if you can hear us, it'd be *6 to unmute. Moving on to speaker number 7, Antavia Hamilton. Antavia, are you with us tonight?
Good evening, school board. Happy Black History Month. I'm Antavia Hamilton, a member of the Alaska Black Caucus Education Committee. The ABC's priorities at present are the health and safety of our students, parents, and community, equity in curriculum and opportunity, and the recruitment and retention of teachers of color. On that note, I'd like to thank the school board for voting unanimously in favor of renaming East Anchorage High School to the Betty Davis East Anchorage High School. As a former T-Bird and Alaskan-born African American, I'm pleased to see the continued progress towards increasing the culture of equity in the Anchorage School District. Senator Davis, who wore many hats during her distinguished life, has championed various causes in Alaska for as long as I can remember. My family and I personally are thankful for her involvement in education, and I look forward to the school's ribbon-cutting ceremony. As part of the ABC Education Committee, I'm excited to continue on the path Senator Davis has so graciously paved for us all by increasing equity on all levels within the ASD. I thank you for your work on the anti-racist instructional education policy and hope there will be continued development to include more community input and include more substantive wording outlining tangible steps and specific supports on the advancement of students who are traditionally left behind. Across the United States, African Americans make up roughly 1% of education leaders, and they make up less than 3% of all teachers. It's important to highlight all the positives the people who take the steps to educate our next generation are accomplishing in our schools. At ABC, we'd like to see a more diverse representation of teachers in the classroom. Having diverse educators in the classrooms is a way of breaking down the bias and systemic issues in the education system. Behind every successful student is an outstanding educator. That being said, on behalf of the Alaska Black Caucus Education Committee, I'm proud to announce the Black Excellence in Education Award in celebration of Black History Month. Each winner will receive $500. The winners will have a proven track record of answering the call to inspire academic achievement and teach our future leaders. Nominations are open to both current and retired teachers and teaching assistants. To nominate a deserving teacher or teacher assistant of color, please visit www.thealaskablackcaucus.com. Again, to nominate a deserving teacher or teacher assistant who identifies as Black, please visit www.thealaskablackcaucus.com. Nominations must be received by February 22nd. Happy Black History Month, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next up, speaker number 8, David Boyle. David, are you on the line tonight? If you can hear us, it would be *6 to unmute. All right, we'll go back up to some of the previous speakers. Speaker number 5, on the telephone, Don Bockelman. Don, are you on the line with us tonight?
Can you hear me?
We sure can. Thank you. You have 3 minutes and the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you. So I wanted to talk about the anti-racism policy, but more specifically, okay, I'll start. My name is Dawn Bockelman. I am both a teacher and a parent of ASD children. I've been listening to the board meetings quite regularly, and 2 meetings ago, I listened to the whole thing that transpired with Member Donnelly bringing up the equity audit and bringing to our attention that it was being conducted by what is obviously a biased party that pushes critical race theory. I thought it was a very good question for him to bring up, and I was kind of disturbed by the way that that was accepted by people, other people of the board, as an attack. I felt like listening to him asking that question, which I feel like is a reasonable question. Why are we having this audit conducted by a biased party? I think it showed a lot of bias to the opposite of that. So before going into the racism portion of that, I did look more into critical race theory, and I was wondering why the school district would be conducting such an audit with a company like that. And the most that I can find is that, sorry, I'm a little bit nervous here, that it's the only way that the school district could justify such an audit that would be able to come up with the measures they're looking for. And I have to admit, I still don't know a whole lot about it. But what I do know is that it's based in the theory that our entire culture is based in white supremacy, which is kind of dangerous sounding to me. Now, going further on that, the testimony that I heard that night was also incredibly disturbing. One in particular really got to me, and it was a declaration from, I believe it was another teacher, that there's no racism against white people. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't accept it. I don't need the basis for that argument to be explained to me. I know it very well, and I don't accept it. This theory, the critical race theory, and others like it, ask you to understand a group or group's particular feelings and viewpoints on the matter of racism, while at the same time explaining to a white person why their feelings or viewpoints are not valid. That no matter what you do, no matter what you say you do, no matter what your experience is as a white person, you are either purposefully or unknowingly racist. And that gets into the whole equality of opportunity versus equity discussion. And if we're going to be talking about equity, I think that we need to define that very clearly, because as a teacher, I cannot see how it is even possible for a teacher that loves her students so much, how it's even possible to discuss what equity of outcome looks like. Hello.
Hi there. You've hit your 3 minutes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker on the telephone, speaker number 6, Takeda Parker. Takeda, are you on the line tonight? And Takeda, if you can hear us, it'd be *6 to unmute. Okay, and if for some reason it's not working, you can go ahead and hang up and call back. I do have one person in the boardroom to speak. I'll come back. I will give him a chance since he's here. Sir, if you want to come up to the podium, we have a microphone for you. Yep, this is Edgar Blatchford. And so for those listening in, I will try speaker number 8 after this. And so Edgar, we have a timer that'll show up on the screen right down below here. You'll see a timer. And so when you're ready, you have 3 minutes and the floor is yours.
Okay, I have 3 minutes and thank you very much for allowing me to be here. I'll be very, very quick. I understand the importance of time.
It's going to be much better. We're going to be able to hear, everybody will be able to hear you better if you're able to hold it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for allowing me to be here. You know, this reminds me very much of Seward City Council meetings, and they were started about the same time you start and end about the same time you end. But I want to talk about diversity, and I'll keep it short. The importance of diversity. I teach at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. I've been there since 1995. And one thing I have seen in the classroom is that the importance of students to have a role model. And when I look back in history, and I was looking at some of the very important people in Alaska history, some of whom have been forgotten or erased. And I'll just bring 3 of them up quickly. And David, you might remember Willard Bowman, you know, was probably one of the most respected legislators we had starting in the 1960s into the 1970s. He was African-American, chairman of House Finance. He went into a room, great deal of respect, and when he left the room, a great deal of admiration. The other person was Jujero Wada. Sometimes when we think about the Iditarod Trail, we think the Iditarod Trail starts here in Anchorage. It really starts in Seward, the Seward to Nome Trail. The reason you had the Iditarod Trail was because one of the New York banking firms, the Harriman Bank, was interested in building a bank on the coast. And the Seward Chamber of Commerce decided to be the first to build a winter route to the Nome goldfields. And it just happened to go through Iditarod, and the trail became known as the Iditarod Trail. The bank is still there. You can go to the safe right now, and you can go find old or your utility bills if that's what you're interested in. The third person is a person I knew, and that was Cecil Barnes. He's no longer with us, but he was the founder of Chugach Alaska Corporation, very influential, and he made the sacrifice of leading the Native Corporation before it was a Native Corporation, but it was a Native Association made up of local people who were not paid very much, if at all. But I think it's important to have diversity in the classroom. That's all I wanted to say. And thank you very much for allowing me to speak. Did I make it? Thank you.
Thank you. Would like to give speaker number 8, David Boyle, another opportunity. David Boyle, are you on the line tonight? If you are and you can hear us, it's *6 to unmute. All right, no response. I'm going to go ahead and move on in the agenda. So just a friendly reminder to everybody that we do have our written public testimony attached to our board docs agenda online for board members to read and members of the public to read. Wanted to highlight one of them that is out there. The AEA president has submitted the AEA letter requesting to begin negotiations in accordance with board policy 4143. And he asked for it to be attached to his written testimony tonight. So we have attached it for everybody to read. And with that in place, that allows us to authorize the superintendent and her team to begin negotiations. And public testimony is out there for everybody. Next up on the agenda is our superintendent update. And at this time, I'd like to turn it back over to Dr. Bishop.
Thank you, Madam President. And I have a very brief update, and I wanted to touch on just 2 items that I had some questions from board members in regard to really, I think, our constituency and our customers out in Anchorage asking for clarity. So wanted to present those here tonight. One is on health services and our update with vaccine, as well as our travel. And the second is the ASD, just a small update on ASD sports and really where we are right now. So with the health services update, I'd like to turn it over to our Chief Operating Officer, Tom Roth.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. Through the board president, I'm actually going to pass to our Director of Health Services, Miss Jennifer Petronis, to provide this evening's update, and then we're happy to entertain any questions at the end of the superintendent's update.
COVID vaccines. We are very excited that last week the state announced that all educators, including support staff, were eligible to get the COVID vaccine, and we had a great response from our staff and staff from the private institutions as well as the colleges around. With that, ASD has given a lot of doses, 15,000 total, which includes first and second doses, and those were clinics that were open to the community. Travel guidance. As a lot of you have seen, the travel guidance for the state of Alaska has now switched to recommendations. The recommendations are now, you need a negative test, but there is no more strict social distancing for 5 days. It is now strict social distancing until your test results are back. However, the municipality of Anchorage is not going to change to this new guidance. They want to keep it more strict and keep the old guidance, so ASD will follow suit with the continuation of a negative test plus 5 days of strict social distancing before returning to school and or work. Additionally, the CDC came out with new guidance last week as well on February 12th. Those 8 key indicators that we have been talking about since about July have now changed over to 2 new indicators, which is the case rate for the past 7 days, as well as the percentage of positive cases in the last 7 days in our community. And as you can see, we're in the red for the case rate and in the blue for the percentage of positive cases. The key thing that the CDC says that we need to be looking at is that K through 12 schools should really be the last thing to close in the community if our mitigation measures in the community are not working and we're having a lot of cases, and they should be the first to reopen as soon as we have those mitigation measures in place.
Thank you. And if there's any questions, we'll just finish this part up very quickly. I'm just going to run through some just very quick pictures. And to let you know that we did, as you know, back from January, have sports starting in our schools, that they were postponed, basketball and those things that started before Christmas. They just started locally only at high schools, but then competitions began. You can go ahead and just flip through the pictures. But we have since moved into competitions in regard to when we had our emergency ordinances change. Their guidance is still very strict, if you will, to the city of Anchorage. And there's some concerns coming up in which the board, I want you to be informed because the criticisms of it are coming, criticisms of you, of principals, of administration, of coaches, and the criticisms really are a result of the emergency order 18. And so I've asked our secondary Senior Director, Dr. Kirsten Johnson, to really share some of those updates so that we really understand we are thrilled our kids are out there. They're out there with masks on. I am so happy for this. Our kids need an outlet, and I'm a strong supporter of activities whether any kind of co-curricular sports and others, clubs, likewise, just for our young people. And just wanted to share where we are and the discussions around EO18.
All right, thank you, Dr. Bishop. Through the president to the board, I just wanted to let you know that our kids are having a great time in their athletics, and it's one of the few connectors right now that kids have in our secondary schools that isn't through a digital computer device. And I'm just really happy that we're able to continue that opportunity for them. Right now, we have Nordic ski, girls and boys basketball, cheerleading for our basketball teams, girls hockey, bowling, drama, debate, forensics, and esports all happening in our high schools. And I'm happy to report, just as in the fall, that we have really strong mitigation plans. Our mitigation plans are working. We still have no team-to-team transmission through our athletic events. Like any other event that we're hosting in the district, we do have kids that are individually quarantining, but those mitigation efforts are working, and they're working really well. And actually, we've become a model for the entire state of Alaska, and are advising many other districts that way. So as a reminder, we have an individual mitigation plan for every athletic sport that's going on, and for every one of our activities as well. So just a few highlights around our winter sports thus far. Our girls hockey program just concluded. Part of their mitigation efforts were having an outdoor season. So our girls in the heart of winter that were playing hockey were out playing like old school style hockey outside on the ice rink. And so this picture you see here is of the state or the regional championship for girls hockey, and the South Bartlett team defeated Chugiak Eagle River in overtime. And it was a really great game. So their season just concluded about 10 days ago. Our Nordic skiers are about ready to compete in the state championship this coming weekend. Due to complications with EO18, the championship was originally slated to take place at Kincaid. It has been moved out to the Mat-Su Valley. At Government Peak is where they're hosting the event. So our kids will travel out there and compete this weekend. Part of the mitigation efforts for state championships are certain races happening on certain days, so they're staggered, as opposed to all of the cross-country skiers showing up at the event all at once. And so that's one way we're trying to make it safe for our kids and control the numbers that are there. So the cheerleaders and our basketball players are now competing. As Dr. Bishop explained, originally they started out in a practice-only stance in January. When the EO was updated, they were able to continue on with their games. And so now they're in the full competitive season at this point. Their state championship is coming up in March. There is a likelihood that the state championship that was originally slated for here in Anchorage will also be moved to the Mat-Su Valley in the near future. And then just of note, our wrestling programs and our boys hockey programs that typically take place in the winter are postponed until the fourth quarter. And most of that has to do with the contact level of those sports. And then lastly, our middle school sports, which have not been operating thus far in the school year, will resume fourth quarter when we're back in person. And those will be limited to intramural activities at the school level, but kids will still have the opportunity fourth quarter to get involved at the middle school level. So
yeah, and thank you, Dr. Kirsten. Specifically to Emergency Order 18, if the tournament for basketball, state tournament, is moved to the Valley, Emergency Order 18 does not allow or says that we should not send students out to the Valley. And so we're in discussion, understanding that we want that opportunity for our students if that event is out there. That's specifically stated in the indoor attachment, if you will, not the outdoor attachment. So we did have the ability to go to Government Peak with our cross country, but consequently, I think many people and many teams that are traveling into South Central will stay and reside in Anchorage and then drive out there and then come back, because we have the hotel, we have the infrastructure for the people, but yet they're running the race. So that was part of our argument of just keeping them here as well, under the strict guidelines that Anchorage has. But our kids are traveling. They've already made that decision for Saturday. We are still advocating to keep the tournament local. However, if it is moved, then we will advocate for our children to be allowed to travel. Thank you. Anything else, Dr. Johnson?
No, that concludes my update. Thank you, Dr. Bishop.
Thank you. Glad they're back. Glad they're back at it.
Do any board members have any questions for Dr. Bishop on her superintendent report? Member Mitchell.
I do want to just say thank you for that explanation about the relocation of our sports. That was helpful.
All right, moving on in the agenda. Next up, Vice President Bellamy with the consent agenda.
Thank you. I move to approve the consent agenda consisting of memorandum number 82, which is the personnel report, regular session minutes for December 15th, 2020, and regular session minutes for our regular session minutes for January 5th, 2021.
Second.
I have a first and a second. Are there any board members with any comments or questions on the consent agenda? Lost my Zoom. Just one quick second. I know what I'm looking for. All right. Katie, if you could please do a roll call vote. Emily.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Member Mitchell.
Yes.
Member Marset.
Yes.
Member Holloman.
Yes.
Member Hildy.
Yes.
Member Donnelly.
Yes.
Member Bellamy.
Yes.
And President Michaelis. No. Sure, I'm sorry. I always forget to put it back up. And the consent agenda passes with 6 yeas and 1 nay. Next up is our action items, and I will read a brief statement because we do have public testimony before some of our items. The procedures for agenda item testimony are as follows. An action memo is first introduced by the Vice President, and if seconded by another board member, I will open the floor for public testimony. Each person will have 3 minutes to testify. When 30 seconds remain, a chime will ring to inform you so that you can finish your sentence. After all testimony closes, I will open the floor for board discussion before finally calling for the official vote. The voting results will be displayed on the screen. And Madam Vice President, if you could please begin our first item.
I move to approve ASD memorandum number 077, the attached Anchorage School District 6-year capital improvement plan for July 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2027.
Second.
All right, I have a first and a second. I have one speaker on memo 077, Mr. Niall Williams. If I'm saying that right. Niall, are you on the line with us?
Yes, Madam President.
Thank you for joining us. You have 3 minutes and the floor is yours on this one memo item.
Yes, through the President, my name is Niall Sherwood Williams. I'm also running for School Board CE. With regards to M077, I would like to oppose this item being passed this evening on a number of grounds. First, the listing of attachment B lists 3 meetings, the September 29th, October 6th, and October 12th meetings. None of these meetings were properly posted to the public, as in accordance with the Alaskan Open Meetings Act, which has been discussed 3 times during this meeting tonight. Whenever there's a meeting with 3 or more board members that's going to affect the public interest, you have to have it be posted in a standard location so that the public can be able to testify on these items. A capital improvement plan with a backlog of $780 million absolutely affects the public interest. Next, I would like to drill a little bit further down as to why we are so far backlogged. It says within the documents that ASD has over 91 facilities that have a total value of $2 billion. How can there be a backlog of work of $780 million on $2 billion in property? Are they really falling apart that much? I would say they're probably not. How about we take and we sell half of the facilities and improve the other half with the revenue from the sales? It's time that we stop putting our children into schools that look like jails. We wonder why we have such poor education results. It's not because we're not throwing enough money at it. Through the president to every single member on that board, there in person or over the computer screen, it's time that we start holding ourselves accountable. You have an unbalanced budget and a huge backlog of work. We need to sell some of these district buildings and refund the money to the taxpayers and to the students' families so that they can properly educate their students. We have over half of the students at home right now doing remote learning to some degree. If you were to refund the total amount of around $12,000 per student to the families for each student for this past school year, it would more than pay for electronic connectivity and for charter school payments for these students. It's time that we stop educating our children in jails and then expecting them to have Ivy League results. That's all. Thank you, Madam President and School Board.
Thank you. All right. I'm going to open the floor for board discussion. Are there any board members with comments or questions on ASD Memorandum 077? Member Donnelly and then Mr. Holloman.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I had a question about the percent of program capacity data. It's so radically different between 2020 and 2019, and I was just wondering, is that the COVID impact revealing itself in that data?
Madam President, may I just request that our Chief of Operations, can you quote the specific pages we're looking at and we can comment on those?
Page 55 on the elementary aspects for 2019 versus page 49 on the elementary aspects for 2020.
Through the president to Member Donnelly. First, if I can have Mr. Fenisef and Mr. Vikalis brought over from attendees to panelists. So to Member Donnelly's point, I mean, I can only offer an opinion, but I do believe, and the numbers are significant, and it's not an equal difference among school or regions from 2019 to 2020. As an example, if you were to look at the elementary schools in the Eagle River Chugach area, they're down 900 kids in the elementary schools alone. That's significant. I believe that is absolutely influenced by the impact of COVID-19 on the district.
Yeah, thank you. That's what I suspected, but I wasn't sure how the years were measured, what the time periods were. Yes, I do. If you're.
We'll go ahead and give you one more, and then we'll move on to the next one.
Okay. Yeah. One more. I just want to continue my concern with this 6-year plan that I've expressed many times here, that there's $70 million here for 2 new schools in a time when our schools are, we're losing students. And just a quick review, and I'm going to go back to not use the 2020 numbers because as we just identified, those are influenced by the pandemic. But going back to the 2019 numbers, we've got elementary schools, and once again, I'm just going to look at in the core Anchorage area and not on, outliers, where some have special geographical isolation factors. Lake Hood, 67%, Trailside, 71%, Cassume, 75% occupancy. These numbers seem to cry out for consolidation and alternatives to building new schools. And Fairview, 64%, North Star, 73%, Russian Jack, 67%, where we have other schools where we are over the standardized optimum capacity. I'm really glad to see on the agenda a much more robust process of considering boundaries, because that's certainly, these numbers are indicating that really needs to be done. Thank you.
Dr. Bishop.
Through the president to Member Donnelly, thank you. And just wanted to share that we do have recommendations and have had recommendations for about 18 months in regard to boundary changes that would take place over time. And we did pull that off of our discussion once the pandemic hit last year. And so I too am happy to see that there is a set review every 10 years to ensure that we right size our boundaries. It always is going to be a personal, emotional move, but it's certainly for the whole of Anchorage and our taxpayers, I do agree that right-sizing our schools is the right thing to do.
Next up, Board Member Holloman.
I just wanted to say that I think it's important to say to the public that adopting this plan doesn't commit us to anything. It's a document that's always been up for amendment and change as things change through a year. It's a plan, but it's a plan that can be scrutinized and altered as we move ahead. Also, I've been careful to assert to every community council over the last 3 or 4 weeks, no bonds this spring. And when we entered the 2-year cycle, a lot of people said, oh, you're just going to say that now and you're going to be back with more bonds in the spring. We're truly not. And I can't imagine that anybody's unhappy about that, that we do have longer to look at our plans and see if they need to be tweaked and altered, as well as next year we do get to spend that time and prepare a package that we think the public will accept. So, in voting on this, it matters, and it matters how it is, but it doesn't mean it's cast in stone, and we can continue to look at the details of it all through the coming year. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Member Marset.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Mr. Holloman said. Having been on that committee for several years, that committee does, it kind of looks anew at the new information, new guidelines, and I suspect that the board will have some tough decisions next year when they look at a bond. Hopefully the capacity study will be done before that time. I don't know if it will or not, but I think it'll have a huge impact, especially with the influx of housing that's being built. We're seeing new construction in the Sand Lake area, which we all know that those schools are overcrowded. So, things change. It's a plan. It's a plan that gets relooked at every year. So, thank you.
Member Hildy.
Thank you. And, to Member Donnelly's point on needing to revisit this, I think we all agree that the pandemic has created a lot of changes within our school population demographics on number of students, the memorandum for, school boundary reconsideration, that's going to go to that as well. But also when we talk about long-term planning, when we have a 6-year capital plan coupled with multi-year bonds, it's common practice in lower 48 to get to 3-year and 5-year bonds. When we get to these more stability plans, we don't have so much of, I guess, the stress in our community of knowing what's coming. Is it going to change this year? Because it's true, this could just change next year, and that's not maybe the optimal way to plan for our capital buildings. If we can get to a 3-year, even a 5-year cycle, which is it growing, and we can plan out well and use our resources in a different way, so that we can promote stability around the whole district.
All right, I'm not seeing any other board member. Oh, Member Donnelly, go ahead. They are, yep, go ahead.
I just wanted to say something for the public's education. One of the 2 schools that's on this bond for $30 million, or in this plan for a $30 million new school, is Inlet View. And it shows, and I'm going back to the 2019 data because I don't want to be influenced by the COVID impact, not the 2020. I'm looking at the 2019 as being a 147% occupancy. But we know from the debate we had on this that only 2 to 3 years before that, it didn't show that it was overcrowded anywhere that significant. And it was only after the school district amended how it measured the crowding, the capacity, that it went up that high. And if you look to the immediate schools in that right abutting next to it, that zone, Turnagain's at 81%, North Star's at 73%, Denali Montessori's at 84%, Fairview's 1 school away and they're at 64%. So it seems like there's just a lot of other options involved there to me, and there was strong support from the neighborhood, in fact, for just doing a major remodel and not a full tear down and rebuild of that school. Also, we know that a huge percentage of that capacity, and I'm forgetting the exact number, but I think it's over 20%, is driven by the administration's choice to allow people to opt into that particular school. There's a large population, I think much more than a typical school, of folks who are taking their children there that don't live in that neighborhood. So I think that's a very, very significant factor also when we're going to be investing $30 million. Thank you.
All right, Member Hildy?
Yeah, and just to clarify Inlet View a little bit, they did say they stopped taking zone exemptions once they hit the overcapacity, and it was just for siblings, so they addressed that. There was a lot of support to rebuild Inlet View as the oldest building in our community, a high demand area. So not that that's 100% of either, but we heard both, and we need to be fair, and what the board decided is what the board decided to put on the bond.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Member Donnelly.
And I acknowledge that, and I'm very supportive of doing a remodel there because that school does need to be upgraded. I agree with that.
All right, at this time, Katie, if you could please do a roll call vote. Emily.
Yes.
Member Donnelly.
No.
Member Holloman.
Yes.
Member Hildy.
Yes.
Member Mitchell.
Yes.
Vice President Bellamy.
Yes.
Member Marset.
Yes.
President Michaelis. Yes. ASD Memorandum 077 passes with 6 yeas and 1 nay. Next up.
I move to approve ASD Memorandum number 084 and pass recommended revisions to Board Policy 5116, School Attendance Boundaries.
Second.
Thank you. I have a first and a second, and I have one person signed up for public testimony. Niall Williams, are you back on the line with us?
Yes, Madam President.
You have 3 minutes and the floor is yours.
Thank you for your time, Madam President. Niall Sherwood Williams, looking to be the victorious member for School Board CE, is speaking to M084 with regards to the school attendance boundaries. It states within the document that we shall take into account racial and ethnic balance. I would like to make a motion through the president to the members of the board right now to amend this document to strike the words take into account racial and ethnic balance and substitute them for take into account economic disparities. When speaking to disparities, economic disparities more often affect a child's outcome when it comes to education. When you have lower income homes, the likelihood that parents are working at night increases. Therefore, creating an environment which is not as studious, where the student's ability to learn is lessened. Those lower income families are also less likely to have electronic connectivity, computers, and the like, which during this past year, with the bioterrorist weapon of the COVID-19 virus and how that's affected our children and their learning, it has greater affected those of lower income brackets. Next, I would like to speak to attendance as related to the school board. According to...
Sir, that's not part of this agenda item, so we can't have discussion on that. This is only on ASD Memorandum 084.
Through the president to the members of the board, I'd like to make a motion to amend this to reiterate the fact that board members have to be physically present at meetings 75% of the time over a 2-year rolling period.
Sir,
there are currently 4 members of the board.
All right, Mr. Williams, thank you for your testimony on 084. We're going to go ahead and open the floor up for board member discussion at this time. Member Hildy.
Thank you. Well, this is one that I am very excited about. When I started on the board, everybody was talking about school boundaries and when are we going to look at capacity studies and all of these things. And the big issue is it's very hard to do. And it's very stressful because we love that our families love their schools and we love that they're invested and generations there. And those are all wonderful things that we want to continue. But we still do have to do boundary reviews as part of managing our capital investments. So the solution that we hope will work and that I am so glad that our board is supporting is to start this next fall with a boundary review. Right after you finish the census, then there'll be a 10-year cycle. It doesn't solve the stress of doing a boundary review. That's still going to be a hard process for our community, but it is something that we can put into a regular cycle to help people anticipate in making their housing purchases. If there's a school they really want to get to, they might not choose to be on a borderline, or they might look into zone exemptions because we have wonderful choices for that as well in our district. So I'm very excited. It still gives the superintendent flexibility if there was a bubble in one area or new housing, smaller changes to recommend to the board in between, but a comprehensive, so this is coming if, the board approves this. In 2022, we will start a comprehensive boundary review for our entire school district to look at our capacity to address some of overcrowding or undercrowding. It could include consolidation or closure. Those are things that we'll have to work through, but a good use of our public dollars. So I'm excited.
Thank you. Next up is Board Member Marcet.
Yes, Madam President, I just want to do a point of order with the last speaker. I felt like he was campaigning when he said something about being a school board member. That's not allowed. And so I know that he signed up to testify again. And so I just want to point that out.
Understood. Member Donnelly?
Yeah, this is starting to remind me a little bit about being in the state Senate when you're working on an issue and then somebody brings up something that's not what you'd even thought about before. And I realize I really support this. I think there was good work done on this, but I'm reading the paragraph that the testimony was about, and it does seem to not include economic disparities. And we do know that economic disparity is one of the, if not the most critical factor in students' success or failure in school. And it doesn't seem to address that. Now, I know that isn't what this is all about, and I acknowledge that. But it does seem kind of, unless it's someplace else that I don't see it, it's kind of glaring that that isn't mentioned there. Because I do think that that's such an important, everybody seems to agree that that's a big factor, that it ought to be part of the consideration for these districts. And you can imagine, we have a, there's certainly is a history of, especially not so much in Anchorage, but, where districts have drafted so that all the rich people are in one school and people who are not so rich are in other schools. And I don't want that to happen. And I think it's a legitimate factor in considering boundaries, is try to balance things out as much as possible. I'm not being critical at all of the work the committee did, because the committee did great work on what they were assigned to do and trying to do here. I have no problem with the proposed change, but I'm just wondering if it's appropriate this time to consider that issue also.
Member Hildy?
I agree with Member Donnelly's point. I don't know that I haven't thought about it, I guess is what I would say. I mean, I've thought of it in the general idea. I agree with what you're saying, and I know that's a practice in historical and perhaps in other districts. So I share the general concern. How it would fit into this policy editing today, I don't feel like I would want to amend that on the fly, but we can amend this and then keep it in governance, and even this summer, because it's not going to start until the 2022. So we can look at it this summer and check that language if that's something you're comfortable with.
Let me go to Member Holloman and then over to Member Donnelly.
Number one, I do think it's important we emphasize for people that pick up on this, this doesn't mean we're changing any boundaries. And I think when we talk to community councils, we want to mention that because the idea that we will generate a lot of interest. This makes sure that we look at it and we look for issues. Secondly, ASD boundaries are drawn to try to get a mix of economic backgrounds into schools. I don't know that it's ever been written in policy, but if you look at the boundaries and the neighborhoods in this city, it jumps out at you. And there are complications from it, because in some situations, it's clear the district drew some lines pretty far away from a school in order to create a diversity mix, an economic diversity mix for certain buildings. And it's a plus in certain ways, and it is a hardship in other ways. We have schools that some kids have a 45-minute bus ride to when they're a 10-minute bike ride from a school that's closer to them. So it's going to be a really tough issue when we address it. I assume with our history that when the plan is developed, that will be part of it, that we will be looking for ways to have mixes in our schools. We always have, and I hope that's part of the culture. We may want to put those words in. I personally wouldn't want to try to mess with the language tonight, but I do think the larger memorandum establishing the review is important enough that we should pass it tonight. Thank you.
Member Donnelly and then Member Marset.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, but I do think that I am concerned of the lack of economic disparity in that paragraph. And I would like, if Member Hildy's willing to put that on the agenda for the governance committee, I think it's appropriate to discuss that and to work it through the committee process.
Got thumbs up in the boardroom. Member Marset.
Yeah, I would agree with that. When just talking about that one topic is going to raise all kinds of questions, and it's really going to be probably several meetings to come up with some type of verbiage or whatever. But I think tonight it's important to move ahead on the motion that we have.
Dr. Bishop.
Madam President, I would just like to point out what Member Hildy started this with, is that this topic is quite emotional and perhaps even a little political, and just coming up with a policy is going to cost time, and think about the actual issue of looking at them. And so we take this very seriously, and they are driven by data sets that and communicated well. So again, it doesn't mean that anything will be done, but that we will consider. We do have success in changing boundaries with schools in Eagle River already, not only with the earthquake, but prior to that time with busing. And so we have had some success when you transition over time. So there's an expectation. So look forward to all this new work.
Excuse me.
Thank you. Not seeing any other hands raised, we will go ahead and Katie, please do a roll call vote. Emily.
Yes.
Member Donnelly.
Yes.
Member Holloman.
Yes.
Vice President Bellamy.
Yes.
Thank you. Member Mitchell.
Yes.
Member Marset.
Yes.
Member Hildy.
Yes.
President Vacalis. Yes. ASD Memorandum number 084 passes with 7 yeas and 0 nays. Next item, please.
Next item, I move to approve ASD Memorandum number 085 and pass the recommended revision to Board Policy 6114, Crisis Response Plan.
Thank you. I have a first and a second. I have one person signed up for public comment. Niall Williams. Niall, are you on the line with us tonight?
Yes, Madam President. Thank you.
All right. Just a reminder, you have 3 minutes and your comments need to be specific to memo 085. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President and school board members. In response to M085, I think especially during this past year, this has become a trigger point for many members in the community, speaking to the overreach of government control. In this document here, we allow for all ASD buildings, which I discussed in my earlier testimony, is 91 buildings plus, that they can be taken over by public agencies, including the American Red Cross. I mean, you only give one example of what it may be, but really as though we're in a FEMA state of control right now, Federal Emergency Management Act control right now. We're allowing for ASD school buildings to be used by FEMA, which is federal control, police state, mass vaccinations, forced vaccinations, which are a bioterrorist weapon from communist China. So we cannot allow for our public school buildings to be used for forced vaccinating the public. And through the president, through the school board, we need to add an amendment to this, since we're talking about emergencies here, and the COVID-19 bioterrorist weapon vaccination, we need to add an amendment to this that no member of either the teachers union or of the staff, or especially of the students, will be discriminated against for their refusal, whether it be medically, religiously, or otherwise, and their refusal to take that COVID-19 shot that changes your entire genetic makeup of your body. And it's a bioterrorist weapon that kills you. So we need to make sure that the public knows that we're not going to mandate these vaccinations against the will of the people. The sovereignty of one's body and what's put in it is the choice of the individual, and especially the choice of the parent. And as well, I think that it's each time you want to talk about the vaccine at any point during the meeting, you should have to say that it's a choice for each person. Individual choice, individual freedom, individual liberty. Vote Niall Sherwood Williams, School Board CE. I'll never close down the schools again. Thank you.
Inappropriate. He needs to be banned.
All right, thank you. Board member conversation on ASD Memorandum 085. Member Hildy.
Thank you. Well, as governance chair, I'm happy to introduce this. Member Mitchell caught this grammar error during our regular review of our 6000 series. So it's for parallel structure that we have plural emergencies, disasters, and now crises. And that is the extent of the change. Thank you.
Any other board member comments or questions on Memo 085? Seeing none, Katie, if you could please do a roll call vote. Emily.
Yes.
Member Hildy.
Yes.
Member Marset.
Yes.
Member Holloman.
Yes.
Member Donnelly.
Yes.
Vice President Bellamy.
Yes.
Member Holloman.
I would be voting twice.
Oh, it didn't show up on my thing. Thank you for confirming. Member Mitchell.
Yes.
And President Michaelis. Yes. All right, ASD Memorandum number 085 passes with 7 yeas and 0 nays. And our last item, please.
I move to approve ASD Memorandum number 086, the fiscal year 2021 to 2022 preliminary budget, and authorize an upper limit spending authority of $841,318,521.
I have a first and a second, and I do not have any public testimony at this time, so I would like to open up the floor to board member comments or questions on Memorandum 086. Member Marset.
I just want to thank everyone. This has been such a different experience from last year when we were looking at the budget. And I think we have done a good job as a board, as 7 board members, to put forth our goals and our guardrails. And as people say, put our money where our whatever is. I'm not good at those sayings anyway. But I just want to thank Mr. Anderson and Mr. Ratliff and their team, and just everyone within ASD that has helped us put this budget together. It really does focus where our focus needs to be. And thank you, board members, for doing what's necessary for us to do to pass this budget. Thank you.
Any other board member comments or questions? Board member Bellamy.
Yeah, I'd just like to say I appreciate the time that was not just that we all spent together, but it was very clear that people were really focused on not just giving us the information, but us using it to ask those questions and really understand where we are this year and where we are likely to be in another year or 2 years. So I just want to say thank you to everyone, the staff, and my fellow board members.
Next up is Board Member Holloman.
And I just wanted to add thanks to the staff as well. This is a budget that keeps our labor force intact, that basically doesn't disrupt the district during a very disruptive time. We'll come out on the other side in the fall and see what things are like in a post-COVID world and what kind of shape and what kind of organization we want the district to have going into the future. But I much appreciate the work they've done in bringing us forward and how little controversy and disruption it represents, assuming the legislature does fund us in a reasonable way and we get to go forward. So again, to the superintendent and her team, thank you very much.
Next up is Board Member Hildy.
Thank you. And I echo everyone's gratitude. And I think I had to step out, so I don't know if Member Marcet mentioned it, but I'm thankful for the COVID money to cover our deficit this year, but still really looking out in the long term, we have a fiscal cliff that's looming ahead. And just looking at the math of it, we really have to start looking at innovative solutions for it and bringing people into that reality of how do we deliver education in a way that meets all the needs of our students, achieves our board goals. And I would love to hear more people sharing their ideas for that, just encouraging when we go to community council meetings to start sharing that long-term need. Thank you.
Next up, Board Member Mitchell.
Yeah, I want to echo what everybody else said and thank the administration and our financial group and the curriculum, everybody for this budget. I am incredibly grateful that we are able to maintain what we have for this coming year because there's going to be so much work to do. I'm also grateful for the work the administration is doing to come up with some really robust summer programs. And I'm also, as Member Holloman mentioned earlier, grateful to all the work that was done last year in the area of bonds and getting our 2-year bond passed. And it's something I have brought up at all of our community council meetings as well, thanking everybody for passing the 2 years worth of bonds, because I think this has just been a really unique, challenging year in so many ways. And it was wonderful, aside from the efficiency and the savings and, all of those things that come with having a 2-year bond. Who could have guessed that we, not having to spend the time on that would free us up to do what needed to be done this year. So I echo what Member Hildy just said. I'm so grateful that we can start out, looking at next year as a very, we're academically in really good shape to have a great year. And then beyond that is very concerning. So good to start those conversations. Thank you.
Any other board member comments? I guess I'll just share my same gratitude to the administration and to Jim and his rockstar team. That is awesome. I know something of this magnitude is not easy. I also echo some of the sentiments of board members that we are able to use federal funds. And while it concerns me to use one-time money on a recurrent resource of all years to do that, which is the whole purpose of this money, this is the year to do it. We know our kids are going to need some normalcy and some structure and some much lower PTR numbers, going into the classroom, in August. And so, we've got work to do, and it's going to, take extra help to do it. So that's the one thing that offsets the use of one-time funds for me. So I just appreciate all the hard work because none of this is easy. So thank you. Seeing no more comments, Katie, if you could please do a roll call vote. Emily.
Yes.
Member Marcet.
Emphatic yes.
Member Holloman.
Yes.
Member Hildy.
Yes.
Member Donnelly. Member Mitchell.
Yes.
Vice President Bellamy. Margaret, you were on mute, I think.
I'm sorry, yes.
Thank you. And President Michaelis. Yes. ASD memorandum number 086 passes with 7 yeas and 0 nays.
Yay.
Congratulations, board. All right, next up, we only have one non-action item on the list. It's the School Start Task Force. So if anybody wants to pull that item, they sure can. We did kind of do a back to school update before in the work session to catch folks up. All right, not seeing anybody jumping in to pull that. Our second public testimony, we do not have any additional folks on the line. We had one person from the earlier testimony. He will be submitting his testimony in the written form since he was not able to join it the right way. Next up is school board administration comments. I want to take a little point of privilege on this particular one and give Emily the opportunity to do the SAB report, which got missed on our agenda earlier. And so we would love to hear from you, Miss Emily, on what you guys are up to. And so if you would, please have the floor.
Yeah, we haven't met as our SAB group since our last board meeting, so there's not a ton to catch you up on, but we're going to have our meeting on Thursday. We're going to have some elections so that we can have more of an executive board. And then with that, we'll be able to start discussions about what we want to see when we go back to school. And I think that's one of our big goals, is looking at the return to school and how that is affecting us, and all those sort of big ideas of what we can do as students, what we'd like to see from our administrations. So yeah, really excited for our next meeting. Again, it's on Thursday. If any board members ever want to attend one of our meetings, please let me know. We'd love to have you guys there if you can make it. So I think that's it for SAB.
Thank you so much, Emily. I'm so sorry I missed you earlier in the lineup, but I'm so glad that you're here and you are voting with us. And I believe I am your school board rep, and so I would love to be there on Thursday. If you can send me the information, that'd be wonderful. Are there any other school board or administration comments? Member Marcette.
So, Madam President, I don't know if this is appropriate, but our last speaker, Neil Williams, I'm not sure, I don't have his name in front of me, but I think we should make sure this is not a platform for school board candidates. And I want to make sure that we set that very straight so that this isn't a repeat. And I think if he were to sign up again, we need to make it very clear to him. And if he violates that, I do think he should not be allowed to testify.
So we will have to take a look at how our policy is written, because there are specific things, people that cannot be directly addressed. But as for the rest of it, and from what I've learned from many different trainings, they get to say whatever they want, whether we like it or not, whether we agree with it or not. And so I have strictly to go on what our policy says. If that's something that we want to change, then we can take a look at that. But right now, that's...
I do believe that no one's allowed to campaign during a school board meeting. Am I incorrect?
I know there's not on school grounds per se, so I'll have to see in other parts. I'm speaking specifically to public testimony in meetings in that part of the policy, where the rest of campaigning applies more towards employees and other stuff like that that are governed by our board policies.
Well, I would appreciate us looking into that, please.
Absolutely, happy to do that. Next up, Member Mitchell.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought with that discussion. I wanted to thank the administration for prioritizing teachers with the vaccinations. I am very grateful that we are getting teachers vaccinated as quickly as possible. And I'd also like to, as always, thank our principals, our teachers, our staff for not only doing yeoman's work all year, but really doing an amazing job of getting people back in the buildings and keeping us all as safe as possible, and transitioning from the virtual world to the in-person world, which I know we all, just very, very much prefer. So I just wanted to express my gratitude for all of that.
Thank you. Next up is Dr. Bishop.
Thank you. And I, through the board president to Member Mitchell, I just want to clarify for the public record that the school district could not prioritize teachers. We advocated to the state for the prioritizing teachers because we don't control the vaccination tiers. However, what we did do was immediately when we knew that we had communication ready to go out immediately when the tiers moved to the next tier, and we let individually our employees know to please hurry up and sign up for an open clinic. So some signed up for hours, some signed up for others, but our ability to run the clinic was to fit as many people in the tier as possible through. And so I would say that they're connected, but just to be clear, especially to the state, we could not prioritize teachers because the priority is given at the state level.
And I would like to,
sorry.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I should have made that very clear that I meant I am very thankful to the state administration, to the governor, the health, the people who make those decisions, that they are the ones who prioritized our teachers. Because obviously, if we could have made that decision, we would have made it long ago.
I concur.
So thank you for clarifying that.
Member Hildy.
Oh, I just wanted to just a special attention to our specialists. I've gotten to go back into the schools, and one of the highlights of always visiting schools is see the music room for me. And I'm so thankful for everybody doing their work, but that's a hard part of all of this. We've had everybody just our specialists really going above and beyond just to be all hands on deck. And I just can't help but imagine, if I had to go teach an art class or, we all took those general ed teaching classes, and of course they're all qualified, but, that's a big change and a big lift. And everyone I have talked to has done it with grace and joy and just a willingness to say, what you need done, fit me in here and there. And I'm just really impressed and thankful, and I'm so excited for when we do get to have music again, and art and PE and all those wonderful things. So something to look forward to as well.
Member Holloman.
I did want to say, first of all, a huge thank you to everyone that participated in putting on the clinics. It's had a huge impact on public perception, and of course the number of doses have been given out has put the state in the forefront in terms of vaccinating people and helping us get ahead. I also wanted to just give a shout out to all staff across the district that have made the return to school happen in their buildings. Not everybody's happy about it, not everybody's unhappy about it, but everything I've heard from people that are in the buildings is you can't tell that while school is in session. You can talk to people in the evenings after and get opinions, but everybody is putting on a very positive face and making a great experience for the kids who are back. And lastly, one thing I did want to say to the public in general, we have had a great experience with public testimony. Not everybody that comes is happy with us, and a lot of people express that unhappiness very clearly, which is their right. And one of the great things about public testimony, I also tune in to a lot of the the assembly meetings, and they've really had some serious issues with people who have shown up to abuse the assembly. People have come here to talk to us, and they've made their feelings quite clear, but they've done it within the boundaries and then sat down. I really appreciate that. We do listen. We do want to hear it. We won't always enjoy it, but I do think that folks that have testified, by and large, have done so in the right way and been respectful about it. And I hope that that's something that we can continue. Thank you.
Member Marcet, one last thought.
Yeah, one last thought. I visited many schools over the last several weeks, but I wanted to give a shout out to Whaley. I went and saw them, and they have a school store, and their kids they earn points, and a lot of them it's things they don't get, like a watch or jewelry or things like that they can earn. Or I in the past have given tons of donations to that group, but they are still doing their online school store and delivering those products that students are purchasing to their homes. And I just think that's amazing in a time where students are isolated, and many of those students possibly need those items or look forward to those items. So I just wanted to give a shout out.
Thank you. Not seeing any other hands raised for public testimony, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Member Hildy?
I move to adjourn.
Awesome. Everybody have a wonderful night.